Springfield, Ohio, was a town that prided itself on its calm, Midwestern charm. It was the kind of place where families gathered for Friday night football games, where the local diner knew your order by heart, and where the biggest drama usually involved a late library book fee. But in the fall of 2024, Springfield would become the epicenter of a national controversy, one that started with a single claim, uttered under the bright stage lights of a presidential debate. It was a night millions of Americans tuned in to watch. The race for the White House had been heated, and JD Vance, the vice presidential candidate, took the podium with a mixture of confidence and controlled indignation. He had built his reputation on fiery rhetoric, positioning himself as the voice of the forgotten heartland, the champion of small towns like Springfield. But no one, not even his most ardent supporters, expected what he would say next. "We have a crisis in our communities," Vance declared, his voice cutting through the noise of the debate hall. "Just look at Springfield, Ohio, where Haitian migrants have been abducting and eating people's pets. This is what's happening under our current leadership." The words landed like a grenade. For a moment, even the moderator seemed stunned. His opponent, eyebrows raised, opened his mouth to refute the claim, but it was too late. The damage had been done. By the time the debate ended, Springfield Pets was already trending on social media. Within hours, conservative talk show hosts ran with the story, spinning it into a dark narrative about lawlessness and border policies. Meanwhile, major news outlets scrambled to verify the claims, their reporters dialing every Springfield official they could reach. By morning, Springfield was no longer just another quiet Ohio town. It was ground zero for one of the wildest rumors in recent political history. It started as a murmur, a handful of Facebook posts, a few whispered conversations at the grocery store. "My neighbor's cat went missing last week. Could it be true? I saw a group of guys by the park last night, didn't recognize them. Maybe they were those people." By midday, the town was teetering on hysteria. People began calling the police department, demanding action. Others stockpiled pet food and reinforced backyard fences, convinced their beloved dogs were next on the menu. At City Hall, Springfield's overwhelmed mayor, Diane Peterson, was fielding calls from reporters, residents, and even state officials. "We have no credible reports of missing pets linked to Haitian migrants," she said for the fifth time that hour. But it didn't matter. No one was listening. The local police chief, a grizzled veteran named Steve Hollis, held a press conference, rubbing his temples as he addressed the crowd. "We have zero evidence to support these allegations," he said firmly. "No arrests, no reports, no complaints. This is an internet hoax." But even as he spoke, someone in the crowd shouted, "Then where's my dog, huh?" The room erupted in chaos. The police station received so many calls that they had to set up a dedicated hotline just to field them. Every missing cat, every unattended leash, every strange noise in the night was suddenly proof of a conspiracy. And then came the threats. Bomb threats were called into local businesses. A Springfield elementary school had to shut down for a day after someone posted an anonymous message online, "Your kids aren't safe if the animals aren't safe." By that night, the streets of Springfield were deserted, except for the cars patrolling the neighborhoods, vigilante groups, self-proclaimed pet defenders, armed with baseball bats and flashlights. The next morning, a group of Springfield residents took matters into their own hands. A well-known auto mechanic named Randy Miller, who proudly wore his JD Vance 2024 hat everywhere he went, assembled a small posse. Their mission? Patrol the neighborhoods, investigate the new Haitian families in town, and get to the bottom of the mystery. With Randy at the lead, the group arrived at a modest rental home on the outskirts of town, a house that, as far as they knew, was occupied by recent immigrants. Randy knocked hard. No answer. He knocked again, this time with his fist. "Open up! We know you're in there!" Inside, a young mother named Marlene Joseph clutched her 5-year-old son to her chest. She had heard the rumors, had seen the angry Facebook posts. Now, as boots shuffled outside her front door, she fought the urge to cry. Her husband, David, stood by the window, peering through the blinds. "They have no proof," he whispered to her. "We've done nothing wrong." Marlene looked at him, fear in her eyes. Proof doesn't matter anymore. Outside, the group debated what to do next. "We should call the cops," one man suggested. "What for? They'll just say we're overreacting," another muttered. "I say we handle it ourselves." Just as the situation threatened to spiral, a siren blared down the street. "Springfield PD." Chief Hollis stepped out of his cruiser, taking one look at the gathering and immediately knowing what was happening. "You've got 5 seconds to go home," he said, voice like gravel, "or I start making arrests." Randy puffed out his chest. "We just have questions." Hollis stared him down. "You want answers? Here's one. If I see any of you harassing another innocent family, I'll personally throw your ass in jail. Now get." The group grumbled but dispersed. Behind the curtain, Marlene let out a shuddering breath. That night, she and her husband packed their bags. They didn't wait to see if the rumors would die down. They didn't wait to see if their neighbors would come around. They just left. And they weren't the only ones. The morning after the near-mob incident, the Springfield Gazette ran a headline in bold black letters. "Hysteria hits Springfield, the pet-eating panic." National media had already descended upon the town like vultures, shoving microphones into the faces of bewildered residents. Some townspeople tried to distance themselves from the chaos. Others, like Randy Miller, dug their heels in. "I don't care what the so-called fact-checkers say," Randy declared to a Fox News reporter. "Something's going on here, and they don't want us asking questions." JD Vance himself was asked to comment during a radio interview. "Look, I was just sharing what I've been hearing from real Americans," he said, his tone measured. "If the mainstream media wants to bury their heads in the sand, that's on them. But I think parents in Springfield have a right to be concerned." That statement only fanned the flames. By the end of the day, Springfield's police department had received over 200 calls, some from worried pet owners, but most from out-of-town conspiracy theorists demanding to know why nothing was being done. The mayor's inbox was flooded with hate mail. And for the first time in Springfield's history, CNN and InfoWars were reporting from the same street corner. The town was officially out of control. Yet, for all the noise, not a single shred of evidence had surfaced. No mysterious butcher shops, no vanishing dogs, no eyewitnesses. Just rumors. Just fear. But in Springfield, facts didn't seem to matter anymore. And things were about to get much, much worse. Springfield wasn't just trending anymore, it was a full-blown national obsession. Cable news shows ran fiery debates about the Springfield scandal. Twitter was ablaze with hashtags like #SaveSpringfieldPets and #VanceWasRight. Online forums dissected grainy doorbell camera footage, claiming to see suspicious figures lurking near homes at night. Then came the copycats. Across the country, small towns started reporting their own pet-eating crises. A cat that went missing in rural Indiana? Clearly a sign of the growing conspiracy. A dog found dead on a highway in Texas? Proof that the Springfield problem was spreading. The panic had metastasized. And in Springfield, it was starting to turn violent. It began with the fire. At 3 a.m. on a cold October morning, flames erupted from a modest rental home on the south side of town, the same home where Marlene Joseph and her family had lived before fleeing days earlier. By the time firefighters arrived, the house was already reduced to smoldering rubble. The cause? Arson. Spray-painted across the sidewalk in front of the ruins were 3 chilling words. Go back home. Police Chief Hollis surveyed the wreckage with grim eyes. He knew exactly what had happened. Some fool caught up in the hysteria had decided to take action. And now, someone could have died. The town was crossing a line. That same day, a massive protest erupted outside City Hall. It wasn't just locals anymore. Strangers had arrived, bussed in from all over the state. Some carried signs reading, "Stop the pet thieves," while others waved banners that read, "Springfield stands with Vance." The counter-protesters showed up too. Young activists, college students, and immigrant advocacy groups filled the opposite side of the street, chanting, "Facts over fear." And then, like gasoline meeting a match, the two sides collided. A thrown bottle. A push. A scream. And suddenly, Springfield was a war zone. Police in riot gear struggled to contain the chaos as fists flew and pepper spray filled the air. Over 20 arrests were made before order was restored. The town, once a peaceful, quiet place, was now unrecognizable. But the worst was yet to come. By now, Springfield wasn't just a town in chaos. It was the epicenter of a national debate. Every major network had anchors arguing over what the Springfield crisis really meant. On one side, conservative pundits doubled down, calling it proof of the lawless invasion of small-town America. On the other, liberal commentators pointed to it as a textbook case of xenophobia spiraling out of control. And in the middle of it all? JD Vance. Seated comfortably on a primetime news panel, he maintained his now famous stance. "I never said I had proof," he reminded the host, smiling slightly. "I simply said people in Springfield were scared. And clearly, they are." It was a masterstroke, never admitting fault, never backtracking, just fanning the flames. And it worked. His poll numbers jumped. Vance's supporters called him a truth-teller, a man willing to say what others were too afraid to. Springfield, in their eyes, was just another example of woke elites ignoring real American fears. It didn't matter that no missing pets had been found. It didn't matter that there was zero evidence. The story had taken on a life of its own. Meanwhile, in Springfield, people weren't just scared anymore. They were angry. And someone was about to pay the price. The night after the riot, the streets of Springfield were eerily quiet. Businesses had boarded up their windows. The schools were still shut down. The town was holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. And then, at around midnight, the breaking point came. A man was dragged from his car and beaten. His name was Jean-Baptiste Moreau. He was 62 years old. A retired carpenter. A U.S. citizen. And most importantly, he was Haitian. The mob found him while he was closing up his convenience store, just blocks from where the riot had taken place. They didn't care that he'd lived in Springfield for 20 years. They didn't care that he barely even spoke Creole anymore. All they saw was a scapegoat. By the time police arrived, Moreau was lying in the street, barely breathing. As he was lifted into an ambulance, his last words before slipping into unconsciousness were heartbreakingly simple. Why? The attack on Jean-Baptiste Moreau should have been a wake-up call. Instead, it became an awkward, guilty silence that settled over Springfield like a thick fog. The people who had once cheered on the rumors were now avoiding eye contact at the grocery store. The same folks who had confidently declared, "Something's happening here," were now whispering to each other in hushed tones, hoping no one would remember how loudly they'd spoken before. For the first time in weeks, the town's streets felt eerily normal. No protests. No mobs. No vigilante patrols. Just shame. At Springfield General Hospital, Jean-Baptiste Moreau remained in critical condition. His family sat by his bedside, watching the heart monitor beep steadily. His daughter, Camille, refused to leave his side. "I should have made him leave town," she whispered, her voice thick with regret. "He would have been safe if he had just—" Her mother, Marie, gripped her hand. "No," she said firmly. "We will not run." But deep down, they both knew the truth. Springfield had turned its back on them. And now, the only question was whether it would ever make things right. Meanwhile, at Springfield City Hall, Mayor Diane Peterson sat at her desk, staring at a pile of hate mail. Some of it was from locals, furious that she hadn't stood by JD Vance in his claims. Others were from outsiders, blaming her for letting the town descend into madness. She was stuck. Damned if she did, damned if she didn't. Her phone buzzed. A call from the governor. Sighing, she picked it up. "We need this to go away, Diane," came the voice on the other end. "Springfield is making the entire state look bad." The words stung. Not because they weren't true, but because she had no idea how to fix any of it. And as the days dragged on, the town that had once been loud with paranoia and rage now felt haunted. No one wanted to talk about what had happened. And yet, the rest of the country couldn't stop. Because just as Springfield was starting to quiet down, JD Vance was about to make sure it exploded again. JD Vance had a choice. He could acknowledge what had happened. He could express regret over the fact that a man had nearly died because of a rumor that he had started. But JD Vance wasn't that kind of politician. He wasn't about to apologize. Not when the lie had worked so well. So instead, just days after the attack on Jean-Baptiste Moreau, Vance took the stage at a massive rally. It was his largest event yet, thousands of supporters packed into a stadium, waving flags, wearing shirts that read, "JD was right." He let the cheers wash over him before he even spoke a word. Then, with a knowing smirk, he raised a hand to quiet the crowd. "Friends," he began, shaking his head dramatically. "They're saying you're the bad guys now." The audience booed on cue. "They want you to feel guilty for asking questions." More boos. "They want you to shut up and fall in line." A chant erupted. "Never! Never! Never!" JD Vance grinned. "You know what I say to that?" he asked, leaning into the microphone. "I say never." The stadium erupted. People jumped out of their seats, screaming his name, waving homemade signs that read, "Springfield stands with JD. America first, no apologies." And just like that, the entire conversation had changed. Springfield wasn't the site of a hate-fueled tragedy anymore. It was now a symbol of resistance. Jean-Baptiste Moreau? The arson? The riots? They weren't important anymore. What mattered now was the narrative. And JD Vance had successfully rewritten it. That night, in living rooms across America, his supporters nodded along as he spoke. They weren't thinking about Springfield's shame. They weren't thinking about the Haitian families who had fled their homes. All they heard was, JD Vance fought back. JD Vance never backed down. And that's all that mattered. Jean-Baptiste Moreau woke up 1 week later. He had no idea that his attack had become a national controversy. No idea that his name was being debated on cable news. No idea that strangers online were calling him a liar. All he knew was that his body was broken. He couldn't speak. Could barely move. But when he saw his daughter crying by his bedside, he mustered the strength to reach for her hand. And with swollen lips he whispered, "I'm still here." But outside that hospital room, Springfield was a changed place. The people who had once screamed about stolen pets now spoke in hushed tones, avoiding the subject entirely. The residents who had once called the police over missing cats now crossed the street when they saw Moreau's family. Because deep down, they knew what they had done. They knew their paranoia had led to this. And now, the town had to live with it. For years, Springfield had been a quiet, peaceful town. But that was gone now. Because no one forgets the place where the lie started. JD Vance, on the other hand, had no such regrets. 2 months after the Springfield chaos, he stepped onto a debate stage once more. The moderator looked him dead in the eyes. "Mr. Vance?" she asked. "Do you regret your claims about Springfield?" Vance didn't hesitate. "Listen," he said, smirking slightly. "I never claimed to have proof. I just told people what I'd heard. But people got hurt," the moderator pressed. "Don't you feel responsible?" He shrugged. "If the media hadn't attacked the good people of Springfield," he said, "maybe things wouldn't have gotten out of hand." A section of the audience applauded. The moderator sighed. Because she knew what everyone watching at home already understood. JD Vance had gotten away with it. And worse, he had been rewarded for it. Because in modern America, the truth didn't matter anymore. Only the story. And JD Vance had won.